What's going on, everybody? Kalipis Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the BLU 3. Now this phone is a TracFone exclusive, and as the name suggests, it is the successor of the BLU 2 that came out around last year at this time. And in case you're not familiar with that phone, basically the main idea with this device is to give you all the basic features you need at a pretty affordable price. So in this video, I'm going to be going over everything you need to know about the BLU 3 to help you decide whether or not it's the right phone for you. But with that being said, let's get started. So with the BLU 3, we're getting a 6-inch IPS LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 268, and an aspect ratio of 18:9. So by today's standards, compared to your average smartphone, it's a little on the small side. I mean, usually a modern smartphone that comes out in 2022 is going to be somewhere around 6.5 inches. So at 6 inches, this is a little bit smaller, but then again, it's not really that bad. The other interesting thing about this display is that with an aspect ratio of 18:9, we're getting a shorter and wider form factor, and that's not really the best because usually we want a taller and more narrow form factor so you can get a more immersive experience in landscape mode. And then when you're reading stuff with a taller and more narrow form factor, you can fit more on the screen without scrolling as much. But with this phone, unfortunately, we're not getting that. But then again, the display really isn't bad for what it is because remember, this is pretty much the most entry-level tier of phone you can get. And all things considered, especially when thinking about the predecessor, the BLU 2, this display really isn't that bad. For only having a 720p resolution, the image does look pretty good and the colors also look decently nice as well. So if you're going to be doing some content consumption, but really not a whole lot, just really using your phone a little bit more lightly, then this display, despite not being the best out there, is still going to be pretty decently usable. Now other than that, the phone does have a thicker bottom bezel and a top bezel for that matter. In fact, in some ways it does look like a larger version of the iPhone 8, so it doesn't exactly have the most modern look, but other than that, the side bezels really aren't that thick, and in general, I don't really think it looks that bad. Now for storage, this phone is getting 32 gigabytes of internal storage with microSD card expansion, so if you're a power user, this is definitely going to leave quite a bit to be desired because 32 gigabytes, while maybe being okay for the average user if you're really not doing a whole lot, is really going to fill up pretty quickly for a power user. If you have a bunch of apps, photos and videos, that kind of stuff, then it will go by fast. Now that being said, while being a little disappointing as far as internal storage goes, at least this phone does have microSD card expansion, so if you have a bunch of photos and videos, maybe music, stuff like that, then you can always offload that onto a microSD card and save a little space. And in that situation, if it's really just photos and videos and more types of media that's filling up your space, then you should probably be okay with this phone. But when it comes to apps, you're probably going to want that stuff on the phone itself. So if you are a power user and you have a bunch of different apps and stuff like that, then again, I would recommend getting a phone with more storage. Now there's no wireless charging with this phone, no real surprise there, but unfortunately we also don't have a fingerprint scanner or face unlock, so you're stuck using a PIN or a pattern or a password, which I personally just don't have any security on this phone because I didn't really see a point. But if you're actually using this phone, then just keep in mind you will have to be using at least a PIN or a pattern to get into it, if not a password, because again, there's no face unlock and no fingerprint scanner. Now I found this to be pretty disappointing because in this day and age, even for a really entry-level phone, fingerprint scanners and face unlock are such trivial features. I feel like every phone being made nowadays should have at least one of those features. They don't even have to have both. There are plenty of Android phones that don't have face unlock, and of course the high-end iPhones don't have fingerprint scanners, and while there are plenty of phones that do have both and that's always nice, I feel like every phone should at least have one of them, but unfortunately with this phone we're getting neither, so if that is a factor that matters to you, definitely keep this in mind. Now taking a look at the camera setup here, for the front-facing camera, it's right here on the bezel. It's kind of like that old iPhone style. In fact, I got an iPhone SE right here that's basically a modern iPhone in the body of an iPhone 8, and it's the same kind of thing, camera on the bezel and that little notch right there. I don't even think I can call that a notch, it's basically part of a bezel. But the point is, unlike most modern smartphones that have either a hole punch design or a water drop notch, the BLU 3 again has a more retro looking design, and while in lots of situations this would be more of a drawback, just because most people want their phone to be at least decently modern looking, I feel like for a phone like this, it's not really that bad. Now that being said, this camera is 8 megapixels, so not the best camera in the world, but it will get the job done. Now on the back, we just got a single camera here, so nothing nothing special. If you want a lot of camera features, this is not going to be the phone for you. Which of course, again, this is such an entry-level phone that if you're even considering it, you're probably aware of what you're getting into. There's really nothing fancy here, just a regular 13 megapixel camera, but also keep in mind that unlike a lot of really entry-level phones, this phone does not have portrait mode at all. And I know that feature is really popular for stuff like social media. On Instagram, I know people use portrait mode all the time. So if you are one of those people, just know that unfortunately we don't have that feature with this phone. Now to give you an idea of what this camera can actually do, here's some photos taken with that rear camera. As you can see, they are pretty decent. I wouldn't really say they're that great. If you really want to take a photo for social media or something like that, maybe just every now and then, this phone should be fine. But like pretty much everything else with this phone, don't expect anything fancy because this is a really basic entry-level device. And while the photos do look okay, they are a little dull, and I wouldn't use this phone for any serious type of photography. Now for video, this phone can shoot videos in 1080p in the rear camera and 720p in the front. And when it comes to video, I honestly wouldn't use this phone for anything beyond Snapchat maybe, just because the video quality really isn't that great. But don't listen to me, take a look for yourself. This is a 1080p test video shot with the BLU 2, and as you can see, it's not really that impressive. Now the stabilization is pretty decent, I will give it that, and the autofocus is also pretty decent for what it is. But if you're shooting videos for something more serious, like a vlog, YouTube, something like that, then I would definitely not use this phone for it, because in addition to having more mediocre video quality, the audio quality is also pretty much unusable. If you want to shoot a video with audio on this phone, you're definitely going to have to get an external mic or something, because otherwise it's really not going to come out very good. So in general, when it comes to the camera setup with this phone, it's not really the best, but it's also not the worst. It really just comes down to how you're using it, because if you do want to take a bunch of photos you're going to keep for social media or something else, and you really do care about the camera quality and features, then this is definitely not going to be the phone for you. But then again, this is a really entry-level phone and it's not really meant for that type of activity. So if you're really just using your phone for the basics and want to get an occasional nice photo here and there and maybe use something like Snapchat for example, then the BLU 3 will get the job done just fine. Now internally, this phone is getting 3GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio P22 processor. Now I ran a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on this phone, and it came back with a single core score of 133 and a multi-core score of 781. Now if you're not really familiar with this test, this may or may not really mean a whole lot to you. So what I recommend doing is running a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on your current phone and comparing your results to these to see whether or not this phone would be an upgrade for you. But personally, I run this test so often on so many different phones, I just kind of know what's a good score and what's not. And I will say, for what this phone is, this is actually pretty surprising, because as it turns out, this phone is actually quite a bit faster than its predecessor. In fact, compared to a lot of other entry-level phones, and I'm talking the ones that are at the bottom tier, like really entry-level, $100 around there or even less, not something like the Samsung Galaxy A23 or the Moto G Power, when taking those phones into consideration, the BLU 3 is actually decently fast. Now, are you really going to be able to do higher end activities like play Fortnite on this phone? No, definitely not. And of course, there's no 5G connectivity, but at the same time, for basic activities like browsing the web, going on social media, listening to music, or maybe streaming the occasional YouTube video, this phone is actually going to be perfectly fine for that stuff. So if you're looking for a device for the basics, then this phone is actually going to be a pretty solid choice. And considering the price range this phone is in, again, this is actually pretty impressive. But like I said before, if you're not really familiar with this kind of test, I do recommend running a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on your current phone and comparing the results to these, because that's really the only way you're going to see whether or not your current phone is faster than this. Now for the battery, this phone has a 3400 mAh battery. I couldn't find any information about fast charging, but I'm assuming it's not supported. Just once again, considering the price range of this phone, I don't really expect a whole lot. But with the 3400 mAh battery, it's not exactly horrible. It's at least bigger than the iPhone SE for that matter, but I wouldn't expect to get amazing battery life with it. If you're using your phone heavily, you definitely will have to charge it during the day, but for the average user, it should be fine. Another thing to consider is that I know a lot of people are just around a charger all day anyway, so this may or may not even matter, But another thing to consider with a slightly smaller battery like this is longevity. Because down the road, as the battery degrades, which all batteries do, since this battery doesn't have the best life to begin with, once it starts to get less and less, you're going to notice it with this phone a lot sooner than you would with, say, a 5000 milliamp hour battery. So if longevity and battery life in general is important to you, definitely keep this in mind because you're probably going to have to end up replacing this phone a little bit sooner than you would with another one. Now, speaking in the battery and stuff like that, one weird thing I noticed with this phone is it does have a removable back, so you can take this completely off, but honestly I can't even find a way to take out the battery. This logically should be it, but it's not, it's just a sticker. So I'm assuming the battery is underneath this, but it's screwed in, so it's not exactly the easiest thing to take it out, nor do I really think you should. But this is how you're gonna get into the SIM card and the microSD card. Now, why they made the back removable without making the battery removable, I really don't know. I think it's honestly a pretty poor design choice, but all the same, that is how it is. And when you're trying to set up the phone for the first time, that may be a little confusing, so definitely keep that in mind. And as far as software goes, this phone does have Android 11, and with a phone in this price range, I would not expect any kind of update. So if you care about getting the newest version of Android as it comes out, or even if you want Android 12 at all for that matter, I would definitely look at a different phone because this phone is not going to be the one for you. But that being said, I would say this phone does run Android 12 pretty well, and surprisingly, in general, the system doesn't really take up too much space on the phone. But now that we've gone over some of the specs and features of this phone, let's take a closer look at the device itself. So on the left side, we got nothing here. On the bottom, we got a USB-C port, which honestly, considering this is such a low-end phone, I was kind of expecting it to be micro USB, but I was pleasantly surprised to see this is actually a normal USB-C, so that's always good. Then we got the speaker right here. Usually speakers are on the bottom, but some phones like this one, of course, do have their speakers on the back. Now, it doesn't really matter, no, not really, but at the same time, definitely keep this in mind in case you're wondering. Also on the bottom, we got the microphone right here. Then on the right side, we got the power key. Volume down, volume up. On the top of the phone, we got the noise cancelling microphone and a 3.5mm headphone jack. On the back, of course, we got the camera and the flash, and a track phone logo right here, and a blue logo on the bottom. In general, this phone is made of pretty cheap plastic all around. For its price range, again, not really surprising. And like I said before, the back is removable, so in case you're wondering where you put in the SIM card and a microSD card, it's all going to be under here. But again, the battery, for whatever reason, isn't removable. I don't really get the logic behind making the back removable but not the battery, but for whatever reason, that's how it is. Again, like I said before, this phone doesn't really look the most modern, but at the same time, I really can't say it looks bad because for what it is, it does look pretty decent. But in general, my final thoughts about the BLU View 3. Honestly, this phone is quite a bit better than I thought it was going to be, and it's certainly better than its predecessor, the BLU View 2. At the end of the day, if you're looking for a really basic device to use for more normal activities, like browsing the web, going on social media, taking a couple photos here and there that you don't expect to be super high quality, maybe you want to use Snapchat, something like that, and then streaming the odd YouTube video every now and then, but really not using the phone too heavily, then the BLU View 3 is going to be a great option for that. And honestly, considering it's such an affordable entry-level device that's literally under $100, I do think this phone does provide quite a bit of value for the money. But I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you found the information useful as well. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. But as always, I will see you in the next video.